We barely had time to celebrate the fall of Viktor Orbán's regime in Hungary when, in neighboring Bulgaria, Rumen Radev and his party unexpectedly won the elections with a landslide victory. And the whole problem is that he's already being called something like the Bulgarian Viktor Orbán because of his sympathy for Russia and his Euroscepticism. Radev's potential influence on the government could create additional obstacles for supporting Ukraine within the EU and NATO. And many have already started to despair. They say that if another Orbán appears in Europe, who will go to Moscow and kiss Vladimir Putin's boots, then Ukraine will once again face problems during key votes in the European Council. But what if I tell you about the Bulgarian Rumen Radev, who is considered pro-Russian, and whose party, Progressive Bulgaria, takes about 55% of the seats in parliament, won't become the new Orbán, so there's nothing to worry about here. Don't believe it? Let's discuss this point together right now, because I see that many have already said that a new Orbán has appeared in Bulgaria, but I can say that there is no new Orbán in Bulgaria and Ukraine really has nothing to worry about there. I'm Petchiy, let's discuss this together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, like this video, leave any comment under this episode, and subscribe to my Telegram channel Petchiy News. The link to it is in the description of this video. There you will also find links on how you can support the work of this YouTube channel. I will be grateful for any of your donations or sponsorships. So, in the early parliamentary elections in Bulgaria, the Progressive Bulgaria coalition led by former president won decisively. Rumen Radev, who is considered a Eurosceptic and a pro-Russian politician, his party will receive an absolute majority of parliamentary seats. The Progressive Bulgaria party is getting 55% of the seats in parliament, which means they have a single-party majority, but I emphasize it seems they won't be able to get 2/3 of the votes. In second place is the centrist populist coalition GERB-SDS of former Prime Minister Boyko Borisov. They have 13.5% of the votes. The coalition led by GERB formed Bulgaria's second-to-last government, which resigned in December after mass protests against corruption. In third place is the bloc of the We Continue the Change Party and the Democratic Bulgaria coalition with 12.6%. And by the way, Radev does not rule out a new coalition in parliament with the latter. Rumen Radev, whom his opponents call not only a Eurosceptic but also a pro-Russian politician, spoke after the polling stations closed, in particular about Bulgaria's place in the European Union and about how Europe needs to change. I'll quote him further. I want to assure you that Bulgaria will continue its efforts to stay on the European path. But believe me, a strong Bulgaria in a strong Europe requires critical thinking and pragmatism. Because Europe has fallen victim to its ambitions to be a moral leader in a world without rules. Therefore, what Europe needs now is once again critical thinking, pragmatic action, and good results. Especially in building a new security architecture and putting great effort into restoring industrial power and competitiveness. This will be Bulgaria's main contribution to its European mission. An interesting statement, isn't it? Although I emphasize again, Radev is called the Bulgarian Viktor Orbán for some reason. Voter turnout. According to the Bulgarian Central Election Commission, it was quite low, about 47% or just over 3 million people. The current elections are a direct result of the political crisis at the end of 2025. At that time, the country saw the largest protests in the last 10 years. They started as a demonstration against the 2026 budget but quickly turned into protests against the entire political system and corruption. In December, the government resigned and the president had to appoint a caretaker government. And to understand the overall chaos in Bulgaria, it's worth noting that since 2021 the country has already changed governments 10 times and held 8 parliamentary elections. So basically, a new government was appointed every 6 months. As you can imagine, what kind of stability can we even talk about? For Bulgaria, Radev himself is both an established politician and something new. He served as president from 2017 to 2026, basically during the entire political crisis, but Bulgaria is still an exclusively parliamentary republic where the government holds the greatest authority. Therefore, Radev himself, on the one hand, did not have any special authority to end the crisis, and on the other hand, he formally remained above the fray. That's why he became the favorite in this election. Why is Radev called the Bulgarian Orbán? As president, he opposed military aid to Ukraine. Мол, поставки болгарского. And putting Ukraine's interests first, he criticized the recently signed security agreement with Ukraine, which was concluded by the interim Bulgarian government. In addition, Radev declared his desire to restore relations with Moscow. However, as president, Radev has shown that he can be quite a flexible politician, and he is not ready to go directly against the positions of the European Union or NATO. He mostly used his Eurosceptic views as a bargaining chip to gain political points within Bulgaria and often made compromises. And right before the elections, he changed his position significantly. At one time, he threatened to block sanctions against Russia, but he never actually did it. And at one time he said that Europe shouldn't help Ukraine at all, but he never actually blocked anything. At one time Radev spoke out against signing the agreement to help Ukraine at the very beginning of the full-scale war, but in the end he signed it, although he stated that he was against Ukraine's rapid accession to NATO. Radev is known for his pro-Russian statements and sympathies toward Moscow. However, just before the elections he stated that Bulgaria should not block the loan. For 90 billion euros to Ukraine, although Bulgaria will not participate in this loan, just like Hungary, Slovakia and the Czech Republic. He basically says we just won't get in the way. For Ukraine, believe me, that's enough. Despite his outright victory, Radev does not have a constitutional majority. That's the same 2/3 of the seats in parliament, like Peter Madar has in Hungary. This means that Radev will have to rely on the support of pro-European political forces to implement economic reforms. Moreover, unlike Viktor Orbán, Radev is a representative of left-wing political forces which are not political allies of Donald Trump. Therefore, he cannot have any connections with the Trump administration. Well, let me explain. As president, Radev represented the Socialist Party. De facto, it is the successor of the Bulgarian Communist Party. Moreover, Radev will be even more cautious than Viktor Orbán, and even more than the Prime Minister of Slovakia, Robert Fico. Let me explain. Robert Fico did not have a single-party majority to form a coalition. At that time, he joined forces with the far-right anti-Ukrainian groups, whose position he is forced to take into account. Otherwise, his coalition in parliament would simply fall apart. If you pay attention, Robert Fico himself can come and meet with Volodymyr Zelensky in Ukraine. And, by the way, behave perfectly reasonably. After returning to Slovakia, he starts making some scandalous statements again. That's it. Well, because you always have to take your coalition partners into account. But in fact, even Fico is not as dangerous as Viktor Orbán. Radev, in this same situation, has an absolute majority in parliament. He doesn't need partners to form a coalition. He only needs partners for a constitutional majority. So it's not always necessary to listen to the radicals. Moreover, the most radical pro-Russian party in Bulgaria, called the Revival Party, this time got almost 3 times fewer seats in parliament than last time. 3 times fewer. And Radev sees this perfectly well and understands that its pro-Russian views did not find much support among Bulgarians. So it's definitely not worth flirting with this. Otherwise, as they say, you might end up facing new elections again. Besides, Radev will need funding from European Union funds to carry out the promised economic reforms. For this, his foreign policy decisions must not contradict EU policy. On the other hand, Bulgaria's military-industrial complex closely cooperates with Ukraine, and it is interested in continuing the supply of weapons. Therefore, it will be difficult for Radev to go, against the interests of his own industrialists. They'll probably just say no and insist they've sold and will keep selling weapons. Therefore, there is no need to worry that Bulgaria will seriously get in Ukraine's way. And finally, I will add one very important point. Remember how last year Ukraine was very worried about Andrej Babiš winning the elections in the Czech Republic? He was also called something like the Czech Viktor Orbán, but in October 2025, Babiš won the elections. But in the end, the Czech Republic didn't even refuse. They didn't abandon the so-called Czech initiative to supply artillery ammunition, because it turned out to be very beneficial for the country. I think it will be the same with Radev in Bulgaria. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, And don't forget to like. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so with any donation or a paid channel membership. How can you do this? All the links and details are under this video. It says there, support Alexei Petchiy's channel. Choose any format that's convenient for you. I will be grateful for any support you give. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.